Okay, and I think we are live.
Right.
Hi, this is Steve Sabadowski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com, and today we have Dr. Georges Benjamin. He's executive director of the American Public Health Association. Uh, Good afternoon, Dr. Benjamin. How are you doing today?
Stephen, I'm just great. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking your time, especially at this point in time with Congress really heating up. And obviously, our discussion is going to focus in on what is called Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. And since the president calls it Obamacare, I guess it's fair enough for me to do so also. But um, let me ask you this. Obviously, your organization is opposed to any repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And I'm just wondering if you could explain to us the reason, the purpose behind the opposition to a repeal.
Well, my organization has been supportive of the fact that we believe that healthcare is a human right. We're in a country that you get your care based on whether or not you have health insurance or not. Yes, we have safety net systems, but the best way to get care is to have that insurance card. And so we have been strong advocates for universal health care for all Americans since our inception, really. So having said that, we think the Affordable Care Act is a good step forward. It does a lot of things. We know that people die simply because they don't have access to health care. And we think the Affordable Care Act goes a long way to reducing the number of people who get ill without getting their illness fixed and who die. And so that's why we don't think it should go away.
Okay, now our former U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu had stated on radio that the Affordable Care Act actually was a compromise, and she said that quote, liberals wanted the all the way to go with giving everybody an insurance card, and so the Affordable Care Act is more of a compromise and within the private sector. I'm just wondering, obviously she's no longer in the Senate, but is it in fact a compromise?
All legislation is a compromise, and the Affordable Care Act is no exception. There are many, many things in that law that was finally passed and signed into law that we would have done differently. We would have certainly had a public option, for sure, in that legislation. We would have certainly wanted to expand Medicaid coverage even higher. We would have probably given greater subsidies. So there are many, many things we would have probably done differently should we have been in control as an association.
Okay, so how do you feel that it's actually, or at least in terms of the public option, do you, that's something we're not going to see, at least in the next couple of years, next 2 years, and that is because Republican control of Congress. Right now, the real concern for many is the possible repealing. Now, Congress, at least the House of Representatives, just I think what for the 56th time is it, or somewhere around that number, has just passed to repeal the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Is there anything different with this particular effort?
No, there's nothing different. The House has been repeatedly doing ceremonial votes. They're now at their 56th vote. The president's going to veto that vote. They do not have the votes to override it, assumingly they can get it through the Senate as well. The fact is, at the end of the day, Americans should have comprehensive access to affordable health coverage. The Affordable Care Act has done that for millions of Americans, and it's too far. We're not taking this away.
Okay, now the biggest, there's quite a number of beefs about the act. Number one is the cost. And if we have a public option, then wouldn't that actually be a greater cost to the United States and the taxpayers?
Well, not necessarily. A public option would have probably given more competition and may have actually brought costs down. The Medicare program is administratively far less costly than private insurance. I happen to have private insurance, and my company and my members and my staff certainly have access to private insurance. Having said that, Medicare, which all seniors love, and I'm getting near that age, and I'm going to love it too, is in essence a national public option, and we all love that program. If my organization had its way, we would do Medicare for all. Now, we didn't get that, and the public option would be much more competitive. But I can tell you that for many, 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 many more Americans, the insurance that they actually have to pay out of pocket under the Affordable Care Act is much cheaper than it was, 3 years ago.
Okay, now I've been hearing, and please help me, because I agree with what you're saying, that for many Americans the insurance is actually cheaper. However, down here in Louisiana, I think many of the voters feel just the opposite. And I think that's one of the reasons why Mary Landrieu is no longer in the U.S. Senate. And from what I am hearing, at least from them, who have staunch opposition, is that their premiums have increased double, triple. I've asked those people to please send me the information so I could see exactly and corroborate. So, you're saying for many, many, many
have they
people.
Done that?
No. They have not. Not that I would expect them to. But what is reality, though? I mean, is reality for everybody a lot lower insurance premiums, or is it a whole lot higher, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. And so for the vast majority of people, their insurance premiums are less. And even if the premium went up, if you're eligible for a subsidy, your out-of-pocket costs might be lower. Some people you're paying the same. And remember that two things are also going on in Louisiana. Number one, you did not expand Medicaid. And number two, you have a federally run, basically, health exchange. So, you have a system that doesn't have one where everyone is in and no one out. In a system with everyone in and no one out, certainly costs are going to come down. If you have a very robust health exchange where you have lots of health plans competing the American way, then your costs will come down. So, when you have these bifurcated systems and people do the cherry picking that they often do to make their arguments, then you can't often get to the truth. Well, the truth is, yes, there's some variation in costs, but overall, most people are paying far less out of pocket than they did before the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, also another complaint is that the health costs actually are increasing, and directly because of Obamacare. Could you address that, please?
Well, actually healthcare costs at a national level are actually greatly slowing. Now, costs always go up. We always have inflation. In every part of our economy, inflation occurs, but inflation is occurring much lower than it has been during the Obamacare years. Now, having said that, how much of that's due to Obamacare and how much of that's due in the recession, I don't think anybody really knows, but it's probably due to both.
Now, in terms of, say, the tax credits that if you are able to get on to, say, the Affordable Care Act in the marketplace and you get a tax credit, basically you have to pay that money back. So does it really cost?
You don't have to pay that money back. The tax credit is a credit, just like a credit. It's advanceable, and you can. It comes off your taxes, so you don't have to pay the money back. Now, if your income goes up and you're not eligible for a component of that, then the IRS, like they do with any other credit, adjusts it. But in most people's cases, they're not paying anything. They don't have to pay anything back.
Okay, but like for example, when you sign on, as I appreciate it, basically you estimate what your income is going to be. If it is more than that, then you're going to have to pay the differential. But this is more of a, shall I say, a loan by the government. Am I correct? The federal government.
It's not a loan. It's not a loan.
Well, I mean, in a sense. Let me yeah, let me just finish if I may, and that is that for those people who were expecting, say a refund, a tax refund, that tax refund could be diminished because of the use of the tax credit, assuming that they chose to have to use a tax credit to
Mhm.
pay for their premium. Is that
Well,
is that
think about what you do when you pay your taxes, right? You and I, we estimate how much we're going to end up having to pay with taxes at the end of the year. And if we guess correctly, we don't have to pay anything back, and the government doesn't, isn't owed anything, and we don't get anything back. But most of us either get something back or have to pay something at the end of the year. And tax credits operate pretty much the same way. We do a great guesstimate based on some intelligent knowledge about what our income is going to be, and the credit is to help you reduce what you would have paid for health insurance. And if that is off, then you might get having to pay a little bit of that back. But that is expected not to be a big deal once people are comfortable with the system, and people we get better at it, and we're going to get better at it over the years. Lots of young people, when they first get into the workplace and they first do their first assessment of what they're going to have to pay for their taxes, a lot of people get year-end surprises, as you may know. I certainly did when I first went into the workplace. But I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm much better at it in terms of predicting my taxes. And I suspect as we get better at it as a system, this tax credit idea will, in terms of how much people might have to pay back, we'll get better at it over time.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing the system on this point at all. What I'm saying is that part of at least the refund that one would normally get could already have paid for the premium for the insurance.
Well,
And
remember, it's not a loan. The government is giving
no,
you.
no, but it's not a loan at all.
Right.
It's in a sense it's like prepaying. So I'm not sure of the analogy, but basically, correct me if I'm wrong. The government, if you qualify, the government will pay the premium, and then at the end of the year or the following year, you determine whether or not how much your income is, and if you're entitled to a tax refund, that tax refund might be reduced, commensurate with the premium that has already been paid by
That's
the
correct.
federal government.
Well, the government is giving you a credit on some of your premium. In most cases, they're reducing what you would have paid out of your pocket. So if your premium was $150, with the tax credit, for example, your premium maybe only be $50, and the government is covering by giving you $100 every month to pay that premium. And then at the end of the year, if it turns out that there is a differential there, and you weren't eligible for for that much premium assistance, you may very well have to give some of that, offset that with taxes. But they're working on that.
Sure.
But remember that you would have had to pay all of that out of pocket for health insurance. In fact,
That's assuming that you sure, and that's assuming that you can get it. No, I think the overall point I was trying to make is that it's not. A lot of people think, well, this is government money. Well, it's really the people's, the individual insurance money, in a great part because they would have received a lot of the tax credit back, or in terms of they would have received much of or some of the refund back that has now been diminished. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So let's move on to something that's probably a whole lot less complicated, at least for me, and that is the Republican opposition. And right now there is no formal Republican opposition. There's a lot of different ideas that are out there. The House, when they when they voted to repeal, they basically are asking 3 House members to come up with recommendations. Am I correct?
Well, the Republicans are trying to come up with a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. And the reason they're having such difficulty is that many of the ideas in the Affordable Care Act were originally Republican ideas. And so the health exchange, for example, Republican idea, individual mandate came from a conservative think tank. A lot of the issues around addressing the processes in this program, some of the grants and stuff, were conservative ideas. So this is truly, as Senator Landrieu said, was a compromise. A lot of ideas from both sides were put into this originally, and so it is tough when the best ideas have been put together on the table to come up with ideas that are new. Not that they can't. I wish them well, coming up with something that will provide universal health care in an affordable way for all Americans. And anyone who comes up with a new idea and a great plan, my organization will certainly look at it and see whether or not it makes sense.
Sure, sure. What do you think is the chances that King versus Burwell, which is the case that is in front of the Supreme Court, might actually impact the mandates? Might actually be a real blow to say Obamacare?
I believe that the Supreme Court will affirm the tax credits in the Affordable Care Act and rule for the administration and against the plaintiffs, which means the subsidies will stay in place. I can tell you that if they don't, you will have absolute chaos in the insurance industry, and I can also assure you that it will not be limited just for those people that are in the Affordable Care Act. It would affect all of our health insurance.
Why is that? Why don't you explain to us, if you don't mind?
Well, the way insurance works is that all of us put into a pot, whether or not we're the same amount, pretty much, whether or not we're real sick or whether or not we're well. And the idea is that when you're real sick, you get to pull out money out the pot, i.e., paying for health care. And when you're not real sick, you're contributing to others to be able to take care of their care. That's the way insurance works. It's a collaborative effort of all of us. If you allow only very sick people to be in a pool, or very well people to be in a pool, insurance doesn't work. And so what these health exchanges do is allow for people to be in a collaborative pool instead of having to buy insurance person by person. So let's say, for example, I have heart disease and diabetes. You're going to charge me more for insurance than someone who doesn't have any of those illnesses. And you're going to charge me a whole lot more than that other person. But if we're in the pool together, then they can charge both of us less, or one of us a little bit more, one of us a little less. And that's fair. What happens if you don't have that health exchange, we will have to go back to the way we used to do it, with very sick people having to pay so much for insurance that often they couldn't afford it, and very well people not having to pay very much. And in fact, if there's no individual mandate, which is also a challenge, that won't be necessarily challenged by King versus Burwell, but if it didn't exist, then there's no reason for healthy people to want to participate at all.
Right, right. Now, one of the areas that has really concerned me, and please, you can tell me if I'm wrong and explain why I'm wrong, but as an attorney, as somebody who's followed politics for quite a while, legislation quite a while, I basically came across, the thought came to me, well, wait a minute. If you repeal Obamacare, then the law obviously ends. So what happens to the insurance industry? What happens to the insurance contracts? What happens to the ability to pay for such things as the pre-existing conditions that we all love, that type of protection? What happens? To me, and just tell me if I'm wrong, but to me, the first thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to go to the hospital and want the insurance to cover it, and if it's a pre-existing condition, the insurance company is going to say, no, we're not covering it because that's no longer the law. You know, I mean, help me. Am I wrong about this?
Well, the Affordable Care Act did several things to the broad population. One of the things, they made it illegal to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. They made it illegal for you to deny people access to insurance. They made it permissible for your child to stay on your insurance policy till they were 26 years of age. They made it. They put in provisions so that the donut hole in the Medicare program went away. The donut hole was a place where people weren't covered for all their prescription drugs at a certain point when they had Medicare coverage. It fixed all those things, and all those things will go back to the way they were 10 years ago. And we think that that would be a terrible problem. We think the Affordable Care Act fixed that for many, many, many people in this country, and so we think that's a big problem.
Okay, so you agree with what I'm saying then, am I correct? I mean,
I practiced emergency medicine for many years, and I can tell you the first thing everybody asked me was, what was your insurance card? And I would have problems referring patients to doctors because they would ask, does this person have insurance? And the person didn't have insurance, we'd have to try to find someone to take care of them. We know that people died because they didn't have access to care. We know that people who were very sick were denied insurance and couldn't get care. We know
sure.
that people put off care because they weren't able to afford their care because they didn't have insurance. We would go back to that time.
Yeah, and so those insurance policies that were in effect, say 2 years ago, are no longer in effect.
Well, we don't know exactly how it's going to, how the transition would occur. I can tell you that the cost to buy insurance will go up, and if it's not within a few months, it will certainly be when you renew your policy. So people concerned now about, under the Affordable Care Act, that there might be some slight increase in costs. I can assure you that if something happened to the Affordable Care Act, there would be large increases in costs.
Well, to me, and I'm not a doomsayer normally, but it just seems to me that in this type of scenario, you have a law that has provided certain protections to consumers. The law no longer, let's assume you have a repeal and a veto override. Let's just assume, and I don't think it's going to happen, but let's just assume that that's what happens because a lot of people are clamoring for it. Okay, so let's again assume that it happens.
Well, a lot of people there are people clamoring for it, but let's
Sure. No, I understand. So the law would no longer exist. The policies that were in place a year or two before no longer exist. That was a contract, and that contract doesn't exist. What you now have is a contract between the parties, but the underlying funding of each one of those contracts are no longer the same. In fact, it's totally different. The money that would be used to help for the tax credits for, like we just talked about, that money is no longer there, okay, because the law would be repealed. So it just seemed to me that everybody might have a plan, and those plans ought to be discussed. But those plans are 3 months, a year, maybe a couple of years down the road. In the meantime, if you have a repeal, you can't repeal and say, okay, well, we're going to repeal, and 6 months down the road, okay, we're going to decide. No, because you have this interim period that people get sick and they need coverage. And insurance companies, the only reason why they have agreed to the pre-existing conditions coverage is because of the pool that you're talking about. Many, many more insureds.
Right.
So I'm just trying to understand it. It just makes total logic to me And that's part of the reason
Well,
why I
think of it this
wanted.
way.
Yeah,
Think of it this way. What would happen tomorrow if all of a sudden all of our car insurance went away? Now think about how many car accidents we have every day.
sure,
All those people would be at risk.
sure. I mean, there's no question. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that when the Republicans are putting these programs together, and I'm not saying that they're wrong to put programs together, because I think that the Affordable Care Act certainly ought to be fixed in areas that where that maybe it might be broken. Okay, so but how in the world are they going to put those plans together at the same time of the repeal? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, you know, we're a nonpartisan organization, and so we'll work with anyone who wants to figure out how to both. We would love for them to figure out ways to improve the Affordable Care Act. There are certainly things that can be fixed and that need to be fixed. Clarifications. Anytime you pass a big piece of legislation like that, there are things that need to be fixed. And we hope that both sides of the political aisle will get together and work collaboratively to fix those things that need to be fixed. I don't think we need a whole new replacement bill. I think we need to fix what we have in front of us. And I think that, you know, people have discovered where there are flaws and there are things that need to be fixed. I can tell you that the exchanges and the subsidies for those exchanges are not one of them. I think the law is pretty clear that the intent was always to provide those subsidies in those health exchanges. The debate was always here in Washington to have everyone eligible for them, whether or not they were state-sponsored or federally sponsored. So I think that that's not something that has to be clarified. And of course, the Supreme Court will make their decision on that, by June or so of this year. But we're firmly of the belief that the legislative authority was there in the law, and it's very clear.
Okay, one last question, and that is, if you had your druthers and you were able to actually perfect a policy, you're playing the Lord right now, what type of protections would you say would absolutely, without question of a doubt, have to be in a policy?
We would have done Medicare for all. We would have had a single payer system that was Medicare for all. Understand, Medicare for all does not mean there aren't private insurance companies, because it would work just like the Medicare system. It would allow for private investment. You'll still have private doctors. You would still have private hospitals, but it would work very much like the Medicare system.
Okay. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for being with us, and I really appreciate your taking your time for us.
Stephen, thank you very much. You have a good day.